Nancy Pelosi discovers NSA files. What she learns about Silicon Valley stuns Congress. The first document was an internal memo dated just 3 months ago. As she began to read, her face grew pale. It detailed a massive collaboration between major tech companies and government surveillance programs, but this went far beyond anything Congress had authorized. "This can't be real," she whispered, but kept reading. Pages of emails between tech CEOs and NSA officials revealed a program to develop AI systems that could predict and influence user behavior. They weren't just collecting data, they were actively shaping people's thoughts, beliefs, and actions. A spreadsheet caught her eye: behavioral modification success rates by platform. The numbers made her feel sick. Facebook, Twitter, Google, they were all involved, all manipulating their users on a scale that seemed impossible. Her phone buzzed, Sarah texting about her next meeting. Nancy stared at the device, suddenly seeing it differently. How many of her own thoughts had been shaped by these algorithms? How many of her grandchildren's? A knock at the door made her jump. "Mrs. Speaker." It was Sarah again. "Congressman Hayes is quite insistent about seeing you. He says it's about the tech regulation bill." Nancy looked at her screen, then at the door. The tech regulation bill they were about to vote on was a joke compared to what she was seeing here. A band-aid on a bullet wound. "Tell him I'm unavailable. And Sarah, get me everything you can find about artificial intelligence programs in Silicon Valley. Public records, news articles, everything." "Yes, ma'am. Are you all right? You look a bit pale." Nancy managed a smile. "I'm fine. Just processing some unexpected information." After Sarah left, Nancy returned to the files each document revealed something worse than the last. Private emails from tech executives joking about how easily they could sway public opinion. Internal studies showing how they could trigger emotional responses in users to make them more susceptible to suggestion. Her hand shook as she reached for her reading glasses. The implications were staggering. Every congressional hearing where tech CEOs had testified about privacy and user protection, they'd all been lying. Every reassurance about data protection and algorithmic transparency had been carefully crafted deception. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across her office when she finally looked up from the computer. Her neck ached, her eyes were burning, but she couldn't stop. This wasn't just another oversight issue or privacy concern. This was a fundamental threat to democracy itself. Her private line rang. The one only family had the number to her daughter. "Mom, are you okay? Sarah said you've been locked in your office all day." Nancy stared at the phone, thinking about all the times she'd reassured her children that social media was safe, that privacy concerns were being addressed. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just dealing with something important, more important than eating. Sarah says you haven't touched your lunch." Nancy glanced at the untouched sandwich on her desk. "I'll eat soon, I promise." "Mom, you're scaring me a little." "What's going on?" Looking at her screen, at the damning evidence laid bare, Nancy felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just maybe delete some of those social media apps you use for a while." "Mom, I have to go. Sweetheart, I love you. Give the kids a hug for me." She hung up before her daughter could ask more questions. The sun had almost set, casting her office in shadows in the gathering darkness. Her computer screen glowed with terrible truths. A new email notification popped up on her secure server. "Tech regulation bill. Final vote tomorrow." Nancy laughed, but there was no humor in it. They were about to vote on regulations that wouldn't even touch the surface of what she'd discovered. The tech giants had played them all for fools. She reached for her phone to call her most trusted staffers, then stopped. The documents showed that phone conversations were being monitored, analyzed, and stored. Even encrypted lines weren't safe. "Oh my God," she whispered, the full implications finally hitting her. They hear everything, see everything. Another knock at her door. This time it was Agent Torres. "Mrs. Speaker, it's past 7. Your security detail is getting concerned." Nancy looked at him, wondering how much he knew, how much anyone knew. "Mark, I need you to do something for me. Find me a room, a completely clean room. No electronics, no devices, nothing that could possibly transmit or receive signals. Can you do that? He studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. When? First thing tomorrow morning. And Mark, don't log this conversation anywhere. Don't email about it. Don't text about it. Just make it happen. Nancy Pelosi's morning started like any other. The January air was crisp and cold in Washington, D.C., and frost patterns decorated the windows of her office in the Capitol. She'd arrived early. As usual, her security detail maintaining a respectful distance as she made her way through the familiar corridors. Morning, Mrs. Speaker, called out James, her longtime security guard. His smile was warm, familiar, a constant in the ever-changing world of politics. Good morning, James. How's Annie doing with her college applications? She got into Georgetown. Ma'am, we're still waiting to hear from Yale. Nancy smiled, genuinely pleased. Tell her I said congratulations. She's a bright girl. Yale would be lucky to have her. These were the moments she cherished, the small, human connections that reminded her why she'd gotten into politics in the first place. As she pushed open the heavy wooden door to her office, her assistant Sarah jumped up from her desk. Mrs. Pelosi, I'm so glad you're early. The Energy Committee moved their meeting to 9 a.m., and Senator Martinez wants to discuss the infrastructure bill over lunch. Nancy hung up her coat, smoothing down her navy blazer. Did Thompson send over the briefing on the tech regulation proposal? Yes, it's on your desk with the morning briefings. And your daughter called. She wants to know if you're still on for dinner tonight. Tell her I wouldn't miss it for the world. Unless the country needs you. Sarah finished with a knowing smile. I'll let her know. Nancy walked into her inner office, the plush carpet muffling her footsteps. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows. Across her desk, she'd sat at this desk for countless hours, made decisions that affected millions of lives. But something felt different today. There was a heaviness in the air, an almost imperceptible tension. She was reaching for the first briefing folder when she saw it. A small, black USB drive, no larger than her thumb, sitting innocuously among her papers. The only marking was a small, etched NSA logo. Sarah, she called out, her voice sharp. Did you put this USB drive on my desk? Her assistant appeared in the doorway, frowning. No, ma'am. The only people who've been in your office this morning are the cleaning staff and security. Nancy picked up the drive, turning it over in her hands. After decades in politics, she'd developed an instinct for moments that could change everything. This felt like one of those moments. Get me Agent Torres from security, she said, her voice calm despite the unease growing in her stomach. While she waited, she examined the drive more closely. It looked ordinary enough, but the NSA logo made her nervous. In all her years of handling classified information, she'd never received anything this way. There were protocols, procedures. Agent Torres arrived within minutes, his face serious. You needed to see me, Mrs. Speaker. Yes, Mark. Can you tell me if anyone unusual has been cleared into my office in the last 24 hours? Yes. Mark, can you tell me if anyone unusual has been cleared into my office in the last 24 hours? He pulled out his tablet, scrolling through the security logs. No, ma'am. Just the usual staff and cleaning crew. Is something wrong? Nancy held up the USB drive. This was on my desk this morning. No note, no explanation. Just an NSA logo. Torres frowned, reaching for the drive. I should take that to our cybersecurity team. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. No, I think this was meant for me specifically. Get me a secure laptop, please. One with no network connection. Mrs. Speaker, protocol states, I know the protocol, Mark, but sometimes protocol isn't enough. The laptop, please. After he left, Nancy sat back in her chair, studying the drive. In her gut, she knew this wasn't official NSA business. This was something else, something someone wanted her to see personally. Sarah poked her head in. Your 9 a.m. is in 10 minutes, Mrs. Speaker. Cancel it. Cancel everything until noon. And Sarah? No calls, no visitors, not even family, her assistants. Eyes widened. She knew this meant something serious was happening. Yes, ma'am. Should I notify security to be on alert? Not yet. Let's see what we're dealing with first. Agent Torres returned with a laptop, his disapproval evident, but professional. The laptop is clean, ma'am. No network capability. Fresh. Operating system. But I really must insist. Thank you, Mark. That will be all. After everyone left, Nancy sat alone in her office, staring at the USB drive. She thought about her family, about the oath she'd taken to protect and serve her country. Whatever was on this drive, someone had gone to great lengths to get it to her specifically. Asterisk, her hands trembled slightly as she plugged in the drive. A single folder appeared. Project Prism _SV _2024. Silicon Valley, she murmured. What have you been up to? She deleted both messages, her hands shaking slightly. They were watching, waiting for her to make a mistake, but they'd chosen the wrong person to threaten. The car pulled up to her daughter's house. Through the window, she could see her grandchildren. At the dinner table, their faces lit by the warm kitchen light. They were laughing, probably sharing stories about their day, completely unaware that their world was about to change. Mrs. Speaker, her driver's voice snapped her back to the present. We've arrived. Nancy touched the USB drive in her pocket. Tomorrow, she would have to start the fight of her life. But tonight, she would hug her grandchildren, smile through dinner, and pretend everything was normal. As she walked to the front door, her phone buzzed one final time. Another unknown number. Last chance. Nancy deleted the message without responding. They thought they could scare her into silence. They thought she would back down. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Sleep wouldn't come. Nancy Pelosi lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling as the digital clock marked another hour gone. 3:47 a.m. The USB drive sat in her safe, but its contents weighed heavily on her mind. Can't sleep. Her husband Paul asked softly, stirring beside her. Go back to sleep, honey. Just work stuff. It's more than that. I haven't seen you this rattled since January 6th. Nancy turned to look at him, his face barely visible in the darkness. Paul, have you ever discovered something so terrible that you wish you could unknow it? He sat up, fully awake now. What's going on, Nancy? She shook her head. I can't tell you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she hesitated. Maybe we should go stay at the lake house for a while. You and the kids. Now I'm really worried. He reached for the bedside lamp. Don't, she said sharply. Leave it off. And don't use your phone tomorrow. Actually, don't use it at all. Nancy, please, just trust me. The rest of the night passed in fitful moments between wakefulness and uneasy sleep. By dawn, Nancy was already dressed and heading to her office. She'd taken a different route, switched cars twice, precautions that would have seemed paranoid just days ago morning. Mrs. Speaker, Sarah greeted her, then frowned. Are you feeling all right? I need you to clear my schedule, Nancy said, ignoring the question, and find Mike Thompson and Elena Rodriguez from Intelligence. Tell them it's about Project Prism. Sarah's eyes widened. Should I use the secure line? No, find them in person. No phones, no emails. And Sarah, if anyone asks, I'm in meetings all day. Once alone, Nancy pulled out a legal pad. Old school, no electronics. She began writing names, people she could trust, people who needed to know. The list was terrifyingly short. A knock at her door made her jump. Mrs. Pelosi? It was Congressman Davis. Do you have a minute? It's about the tech regulation vote. Not now. John, it's important. The Silicon Valley folks are pushing hard for amendments. Nancy looked up, studying him. Was he one of them, a willing participant, or just another puppet? Which folks exactly? O, you know, Facebook, Google, the usual suspects. They're offering some interesting compromises. I bet they are, she muttered. Tell them no amendments, no compromises. But no, John, and do me a favor, don't tell them we had this conversation. After he left, Nancy pulled out the USB drive again. 3 hours of sleep in 2 days was making everything feel surreal. The words on her screen blurred together. User manipulation protocols, behavioral modification success rates, targeted psychological intervention strategies. Her private line rang, the one that wasn't supposed to be traceable. Hello, Nancy. It's Mark. Mark Zuckerberg. We need to talk. Her blood ran cold. How did you get this number? A soft chuckle. Come on, Nancy, you know how. She ended the call, hands shaking. Seconds later, her cell phone lit up with a text. Don't make this difficult. We can meet privately. Discuss terms. Another sleepless night followed. Nancy paced her study at home, jumping at every sound. The documents revealed a level of surveillance and manipulation that seemed impossible. Yet here was proof in their ability to reach her on secure lines, to know her every move. By the third day, dark circles ringed her eyes. Her family was worried. She could see it in their faces, hear it in their carefully worded questions. But she couldn't tell them, not yet. Maybe not ever. Mrs. Speaker, Sarah's voice came through the intercom. Your secure room is ready. Finally, Nancy had handpicked 5 people, trusted staffers and intelligence officials, who hadn't been compromised as far as she could tell. They gathered in a windowless room deep within the Capitol building, swept clean of any electronic devices. After he left, Nancy sat in her darkening office, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her. Tomorrow, she would have to start dealing with this. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to tell people that their worst technological nightmares were true. But tonight, she just sat there, looking out at the Capitol dome glowing in the twilight, wondering how they'd let things go so far, wondering how they were going to make it right. Her computer pinged one last time. A new file had appeared on the USB drive, personnel_surveillance_active, with trembling fingers. She opened it. The first name on the list was hers. Nancy stared at her name on the surveillance list, her mouth dry. Below it were details of her daily routines, transcripts of private conversations, even records of her online shopping habits. They'd been watching her for years. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Speaker, Sarah's voice was hesitant. Your security team insists you should head home. It's almost 9 p.m. Just a few more minutes, Sarah. You should go home too, are you sure? You haven't eaten all day, and you look. I'm fine, Nancy cut her off, perhaps too sharply. She softened her tone. Really, go home to your family. After Sarah left, Nancy began methodically copying the most important files to a separate drive, one she'd had for years, used only for the most sensitive information. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced through the implications. The door opened again, this time without a knock. Nancy's head snapped up. Working late, Nancy? It was Senator Richard Burns, someone she'd worked with for over a decade. But something about his casual entrance, his too relaxed smile, made her uneasy. Richard, I wasn't expecting anyone at this hour. He smiled, settling into one of her visitor chairs without invitation. Oh, you know how it is. Late nights, important work. His eyes flicked to her computer screen. Anything interesting? Nancy casually closed the laptop. Just reviewing the tech regulation bill for tomorrow. You know how dense these things can be. Yes, the bill. He leaned forward. Funny thing about that bill, some of our friends in Silicon Valley are very concerned about certain provisions. Are they? Nancy kept her voice neutral, but her heart was pounding. Which friends would those be? Oh, you know, Mark, Tim, the usual crowd. He waved his hand dismissively. They're worried we might be overreaching. Nancy studied him carefully. Richard had always been pro-tech industry, but this late-night visit felt different. Wrong. Tell me, Richard, when did you start doing their bidding so openly? His smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. We all serve someone, Nancy. At least they're building the future. What are you doing, except standing in the way of progress? Progress. She couldn't keep the anger from her voice. Is that what we're calling it now? He stood smoothly. Just think carefully about tomorrow's vote, Nancy. Some roads, once taken, can't be untaken. After he left, Nancy sat in the darkness, her mind racing. Richard's visit wasn't a coincidence. They knew she had the files. But how? She glanced at her phone, then her laptop, then every electronic device in the room. Of course, they were all compromised, every single one. A text message lit up her phone. Mom, are you still coming to dinner? The kids are asking about you. Nancy picked up the phone, her heart heavy. How did you tell your family that everything, their phones, their computers, their smart homes, was being used against them? She started typing. not feeling well, rain check, then deleted it. If they were watching, any change in routine would alert them. On my way, she typed instead. Just running late. She gathered her things, sliding the USB drive into an inner pocket of her jacket. As she stood, a wave of dizziness hit her, the result of no food and too much stress. Mrs. Speaker, James was at her door. Your car is ready. Thank you, James. She paused. Tell me, do you ever wonder if your phone is listening to you? He laughed. My wife says that all the time. She'll talk about something, and suddenly there's an ad for it on her Facebook. And that doesn't bother you. His smile faded at her. Serious tone. Should it? Nancy patted his arm. Get your daughter off social media, James. Tell her it's not safe. In the car, Nancy watched the familiar Washington landmarks slide past. The city felt different now, as if she was seeing it through a new lens. Every traffic camera, every security system, every phone in every hand, they were all part of it. Her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. The USB drive was not meant for you. Nancy's blood ran cold. As she stared at the message, another came through. Return it by midnight, or else. Her secure line rang. Against her better judgment, she answered. Hello, Nancy. The voice was familiar. One of the biggest tech CEOs in Silicon Valley. I think it's time we had a real conversation about the future. She hung up, hands shaking. They weren't just watching anymore. They were making their move. Nancy walked into the House Intelligence Committee meeting room, her steps heavy but determined. The room was already full, senior committee members shifting uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at phones they'd been instructed to leave outside. Before we begin, she announced, I want to know if anyone here has been contacted by tech industry representatives in the last 48 hours. The silence was deafening. Finally, Congressman Roberts cleared his throat. Look, Nancy, if this is about the regulation bill, this is about something much bigger than that bill. She cut him off, laying out the first batch of documents. What I'm about to show you will change everything. The next hour was filled with gasps, curses, and one incident of Senator Thompson actually vomiting into a trash can when she revealed the psychological manipulation programs. My God, whispered Congresswoman Martinez, her face ashen. My teenage daughter. She's been having anxiety attacks. Her Instagram. It's not just Instagram, Nancy explained. Pulling out more documents. Every major platform is involved. They're not just collecting data. They're shaping thoughts, behaviors, entire worldviews. Senator Graham slammed his fist on the table. This is impossible. The scale of this. It would require computing power we didn't think existed, Nancy finished. Look at page 47. They've been developing quantum AI systems for years. Everything they testified about their capabilities was a lie. The room erupted in overlapping voices. We have to shut them down. The economic impact would be catastrophic. My God, the elections. What about national security? Quiet. Nancy's voice cut through the chaos. We need to think this through carefully. The moment we move against them, a loud bang made everyone jump. The lights flickered, then died. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting the room in an eerie blue glow. What the hell? Someone muttered. Nancy's secure phone buzzed. Impossible. Since all communications were supposed to be blocked in this room. A single message, final chance. Walk away, Mrs. Speaker. Her security chief burst in. We're experiencing a system-wide outage. All congressional networks are down. The committee members looked at each other, the reality of what they were facing finally sinking in. They're showing us their power, Congressman Chen said quietly. This is just a taste of what they can do. Nancy stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Get me the president. No phones, no electronic communications. Direct line. Old school. Mum. Her security chief hesitated. The direct line, it's down to. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, the silence of people realizing just how deep the rabbit hole went. Nancy, Senator Roberts, said softly, my grandson's insulin pump, it's connected to an app. They wouldn't, they couldn't, they could, she answered grimly, and they would. That's what these documents show. Nothing is off limits to them. Congresswoman Martinez was scrolling through her phone, face growing paler. My social media accounts, they're gone. Everything. 20 years of photos, connections. Look at your banking apps, Nancy suggested. Several people did, followed by more gasps and curses. Account temporarily suspended for security review. Senator Thompson read aloud. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Asterisk Nancy pulled out the final set of documents, the ones she'd been most afraid to share. It gets worse. They're not just controlling information flow. They're actively suppressing certain thoughts, certain ideas. The AI systems can identify potential dissidents based on typing patterns, browsing habits, even the way people hold their phones. Jesus Christ, someone whispered. Mrs. Speaker, another aide burst in. CNN is reporting that several members of Congress are under investigation for security breaches. They're naming names, everyone in this room. The timing wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. The message was clear: fight us, and we'll destroy you. Nancy watched as fear spread across the faces around her. These were powerful people, used to wielding influence and authority. But now they were seeing the true face of power in the digital age. My daughter's college acceptance. Congressman Chen was staring at his phone. It's been rescinded. No. Explanation. My wife's medical records. Senator Graham's voice shook. They've been. Enough. Nancy's voice cut through the growing panic. This is exactly what they want. They're trying to scare us into silence. Around midnight, Nancy finally left her office. The halls of the Capitol were eerily quiet, her footsteps echoing off marble floors. Agent Torres walked beside her, more alert than usual. The car's waiting out front. Mrs. Speaker. No, we'll take the underground route. He nodded, not questioning her growing paranoia. As they walked through the dim tunnels, Nancy's phone buzzed again. A text from an unlisted number. We know about the meeting. Your staffers aren't as loyal as you think. She stopped walking, her hand clutching the phone so tight her knuckles went white. Mrs. Speaker, Torres looked concerned. Are you all right? Mark, if I asked you to sweep my house for bugs, without filing any official paperwork. He met her eyes. Already done, Mum. Last night, found 3 devices. Very sophisticated. Military grade. Nancy felt a chill run down her spine. Who knows about this? Just me, and to people I trust with my life. We've worked together since the Marines. She touched his arm. Thank you. At home, Paul was waiting up, worry etched on his face. Nancy, this has to stop. You're not sleeping, barely eating. Whatever this is, I can't. She cut him off. Please, don't ask me. Not yet. The kids are talking about calling a doctor. You look like you're having a breakdown. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Maybe I am. God, I wish this was just a breakdown. Her phone buzzed again. Paul grabbed it before she could. Enough. These calls, these messages, they're driving. He stopped, reading the screen. Nancy snatched the phone back, but it was too late. The message was clear. Your husband's trading records make for interesting reading. What's going on? Paul's voice was barely a whisper. Who's threatening you? Pack a bag. She said, her voice shaking. Call the kids. Tell them to meet us. At the lake house. No phones, no devices. Nothing that can connect to the internet. Nancy, please, just do it. Now, she didn't sleep that night either. How could she? Every camera, every microphone, every digital device was a potential spy. The tech companies hadn't just built a surveillance network. They'd built a weapon. Dawn found her in her study, surrounded by handwritten notes. Each page detailed another violation, another manipulation, another lie told to Congress and the American people. A soft knock at the door. Mom, her daughter again. We're all here. At the lake house. Dad's worried sick. What's going on? Nancy looked at her phone, then threw it in a drawer. I'll explain everything soon. Just stay there. Stay safe. Back at the Capitol, she gathered her trusted team again. Their faces showed the same exhaustion, the same fear she felt. Elena spoke first. They're getting aggressive. My daughter's college application was mysteriously lost this morning. All copies, even the paper ones. Asterisk Mike nodded. My bank accounts were frozen for 2 hours. Technical glitch, they said. They're trying to scare us, Nancy said. her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "Which means we're close to something they really don't want us to find." James Chen spread out more documents. "Look at this. The AI systems aren't just predicting behavior, they're creating psychological profiles. They can identify potential dissidents before they even realize they're dissidents." "Minority Report," Mike muttered. "But with smartphones instead of psychics, it's worse," Elena added. "They're not just identifying, they're actively suppressing, changing news feeds, manipulating social connections, even affecting credit scores." A knock at the door made them all jump. Sarah poked her head in. "Mrs. Speaker, there's a situation. The tech regulation bill, it's been leaked, along with some compromising information about several members of Congress." Nancy closed her eyes. Of course, they were playing hardball now. How bad? Bad enough. 3 senators have already withdrawn their support. More are wavering. The room fell silent. They all knew what this meant. The tech companies were showing their power, demonstrating what they could do with all the information they'd gathered. "Maybe we should wait," Mike suggested. "Build our case stronger, gather more allies." "No." Nancy's voice was steel. "That's what they want. Every day we wait is another day they tighten their grip. We move forward. Now." As if in response, all their phones buzzed simultaneously. The same message on each screen. Final warning. Nancy looked at her team, these brave people who were risking everything because they believed in the truth. How many others had discovered this and stayed quiet? How many had been threatened into silence? "Go home," she told them. "Protect your families. Tomorrow we start the real fight." After they left, Nancy sat alone in the secure room, the weight of 3 sleepless nights pressing down on her. The tech companies had shown their hand. They were willing to destroy lives, careers, families to keep their power. "It's working," someone muttered. The lights flickered again, then came back on. Phones started buzzing all around the room, emails, texts, notifications flooding in. "Look at this." Martinez held up her phone. "My accounts are back. Everything's normal, like nothing happened." "Not nothing," Nancy corrected. "A demonstration. They wanted to show us what they can do. Now they're offering to let things go back to normal. Maybe," Senator Roberts swallowed hard, "maybe we should consider." "Consider what?" Nancy's voice was sharp. "Letting them continue to control every aspect of our lives, manipulate our children's thoughts, decide who succeeds and who fails based on their algorithms." "The market impact," Thompson began. "To hell with the market impact." Nancy rarely shouted, but now her voice rang off the walls. "We're talking about the end of free will, the end of democracy itself." Her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "Your granddaughter's college applications are being processed. All of them. Her choice. Think carefully about your next move." Nancy felt her hands shake with rage. "You want to know what they're really capable of? Look at this." She pulled up the psychological manipulation data, the statistics on teenage suicide rates correlated with social media intervention protocols. Senator Thompson barely made it to the trash can this time. "They're killing our children." Nancy continued, her voice breaking. "Not directly, but they might as well be pulling the trigger. These algorithms, they know exactly how to push vulnerable minds over the edge." The room was silent again, but now it was an angry silence. "What do we do?" Martinez asked finally. "We fight," Nancy answered simply. "Not with computers or phones or networks. They control those. We fight the old way, person to person, truth to truth. They'll destroy us." Roberts warned. "They'll try," Nancy agreed. "But here's what they don't understand. Every threat they make, every account they freeze, every record they alter, it just proves we're right. They're doing exactly what these documents show they've been doing all along." Her phone buzzed one more time. "Turn on the news." Someone flicked on the wall-mounted TV. Breaking news banners flashed across every channel. "Congressional security breach. Multiple representatives implicated, and so it begins." Nancy said quietly. The committee members watched as their faces appeared on screen, accompanied by headlines about investigations, allegations, suspicious activities. "Mrs. Speaker," her security chief reappeared. "There's a situation developing outside. Protesters, thousands of them, They're calling for resignations, of course. The final piece of their defense: turn the public against anyone who might expose the truth. Nancy looked around the room at her colleagues, some angry, some terrified, all now fully aware of what they were facing. Tomorrow, she said firmly, I'm going to stand in the House chamber and tell the American people everything. They can destroy our reputations, freeze our accounts, threaten our families, but they can't stop the truth. Not if we stand together. Asterisk. One by one, heads began to nod. They'd seen behind the curtain now, seen the true face of what technology had become. There was no going back. As if in response, every phone in the room went dark simultaneously. Outside, they could hear the crowd growing larger, angrier. Get me a secure line to the major news networks, Nancy ordered. Not electronic. Run her with written messages. Like 1776. Someone laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. The revolution by horseback. If that's what it takes, Nancy nodded. They control the digital world. Fine, we'll go analog. As her team scrambled to execute her orders, Nancy stood at the window, watching the crowd below, somewhere in Silicon Valley, in gleaming offices filled with servers and screens. The architects of this massive deception were watching too. Let them watch, she thought. Let them see what real power looks like. Not algorithms and data, but people standing up for truth. Her phone lit up one final time. You have no idea what you're starting. Nancy smiled grimly and turned off her phone. As the day wore on, the situation grew increasingly tense. Nancy's secure office had become a command center of sorts, but without any electronics. Paper maps covered the walls, handwritten notes scattered across tables. Mrs. Speaker, Elena burst in, out of breath. They're escalating. The social media campaigns. They're targeting everyone, not just us, but our families, our staff. Nancy looked up from her notes. Show me. Elena laid out printed screenshots. The disinformation was sophisticated, believable. Photos doctored so perfectly even experts would struggle to spot the manipulation. How are they generating these so fast? Congressman Chen wondered, studying a perfectly fake image of himself, supposedly accepting bribes. Thank you all for coming, Nancy began, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. What I'm about to show you, it changes everything. Elena Rodriguez, her top intelligence advisor, spoke first. Is this about the tech companies? We've been seeing some unusual patterns. Unusual doesn't begin to cover it. Nancy spread out printed copies of the documents. They're not just watching us. They're controlling us, all of us. Mike Thompson, her chief of staff, picked up a page. His face went pale. This can't be real. It's real. I've verified it myself. Every major tech platform, Facebook, Google, Twitter, all of them, they're using AI to manipulate user behavior. Elections, purchasing decisions, political beliefs. Everything. Jesus Christ, whispered Congressman James Chen, studying another document. These success rates. They can predict and influence emotional responses with 97% accuracy. And that's just the beginning. Nancy pulled out more papers. They've been lying to Congress, lying to everyone. The algorithms, the data collection, it's all way beyond what they've admitted to. We have to go public, Elena said firmly. It's not that simple. Mike countered. Look at these market projections. If this gets out, the entire tech sector could collapse. We're talking about millions of jobs, trillions in market value. So we let them keep controlling people's minds, Elena shot back. Before Nancy could respond, a knock at the door made everyone freeze. Agent Torres stuck his head in. Mrs. Speaker, there are some gentlemen here to see you. They say they're from the NSA. Nancy's heart raced. I didn't schedule any meetings with the NSA. They're quite insistent, ma'am. She looked at her trusted circle. Destroy those papers. Now. And remember, no phones, no emails, no electronic communications of any kind. The NSA agents were waiting in her office, two men in dark suits who looked more like corporate lawyers than government officials. Congressman Pelosi, the taller one, said smoothly, we need to discuss a security breach. Do you have identification? They pulled out badges. But Nancy had been in Washington too long to be fooled. The badges were perfect, too perfect. Get out of my office, she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Mrs. Pelosi, I don't think you understand. No, you don't understand. Whatever game you're playing, whoever sent you, I'm not afraid." The shorter one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You should be." After they left, Nancy sank into her chair, heart pounding. They were getting bolder, more desperate. She pulled out her secure phone, then stopped. No calls, no emails. They were listening to everything. The rest of the day brought a parade of tech lobbyists, each more insistent than the last. They came bearing promises, threats disguised as warnings, offers of collaboration. "Mrs. Speaker," it was Sarah again. "There's another. No more meetings. No more lobbyists. No more threats disguised as friendly visits." Sarah lowered her voice. "It's your daughter. She says it's urgent." Nancy felt her heart skip. Had they gone after her family already? Her daughter burst in, face flushed. "Mom, what the hell is going on? Paul called me, said you're acting strange, talking about going to the lake house. And now Christine's Instagram account is gone, just disappeared. All her photos, everything." Nancy closed her eyes. Christine, her teenage granddaughter. Of course they'd start there. "Sweetheart, sit down." "No, I don't want to sit down. I want to know what's happening. The kids are scared. Paul is scared. I'm scared." Nancy looked at her daughter, really looked at her. How much could she share? How much should she? "Something's coming," she said finally. "Something big. I can't tell you what. Not yet. But I need you to trust me. Get the family out of town. No phones, no computers. Mom, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared." "I am." After her daughter left, Nancy stared out her office window at the Capitol dome. 3 days without real sleep was making everything feel surreal. The weight of what she knew, what she had to do, pressed down on her like a physical thing. Her computer chimed. Another email from Mark Zuckerberg's office requesting an urgent private meeting. Her phone lit up with texts from unknown numbers, each more threatening than the last. "Think about your family. Everyone has secrets. This can all go away." She deleted them all. As night fell over Washington, Nancy sat alone in her office, surrounded by the ghosts of paper printouts and buried truths. Tomorrow, she would have to start the process of revealing everything. Tomorrow, she would have to face the consequences. But tonight, she just sat there, watching the city lights flicker like stars, wondering how many of those lights were watching her back. "AI," Nancy explained. "The documents show they've developed systems that can create perfect fakes in seconds. Videos, photos, audio, anything they need." A knock at the door made everyone tense. It was Sarah, looking pale. "Ma'am, you need to see this." The television in the corner was showing live footage of protests, not just in Washington but across the country. The crowds held signs with their names, their faces, calling them traitors, conspirators. "My God," muttered Thompson, "they've turned the whole country against us in hours." "Not the whole country." Nancy corrected. "Look closer." She pointed to the screens. The protests were large but localized, primarily in areas with heavy social media usage. Rural areas, places with less digital penetration, remained quiet. "They can only influence people who are plugged into their systems," she explained. "And even then, only those who haven't learned to question what they see." Another aide rushed in. "Mrs. Speaker, the major networks, they're all running the same story, every single one." The headlines were devastating. "Congressional conspiracy threatens tech industry. Pelosi's war on innovation, democracy or technophobia." "How?" Chen demanded. "How did they get every network to fall in line so fast?" Nancy pulled out another document. "Look at the ownership patterns. Shell companies, investment firms. They've been quietly gaining control of media outlets for years. Not direct control, but enough influence to push narratives when they need to." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Nancy Elena said softly, "My daughter just called. Her scholarship, they're threatening to revoke it. All her academic records, her recommendations, they're saying they found irregularities." Before Nancy could respond, more reports started flooding in. Medical records mysteriously changing, bank accounts showing suspicious transactions, emails and texts from years ago suddenly surfacing, altered and damaging social media histories, Rewritten security cameras showing impossible footage. They're not just threatening anymore. Thompson observed grimly. They're showing us exactly how much power they have. Nancy stood, her voice cutting through the growing panic. This is their weakness, not their strength. Every action they take proves exactly what we're trying to expose. But how do we fight back? Martinez demanded. They control everything, not everything. Nancy smiled. Get me the old printing press in the basement. The what? After 9/11s. We installed backup systems. Old school. No electronics, including a printing press. They can control digital information, but they can't stop us from printing the truth. As her team scrambled to implement her orders, Nancy's private line rang. Against her better judgment, she answered. Hello, Nancy. It was Mark Zuckerberg himself this time. You're making this much harder than it needs to be, am I? Or are you just showing everyone exactly what we've discovered about you? We're trying to build a better world, connect people, improve lives, by controlling them, by deciding who succeeds and who fails, by guiding them to better choices. Don't pretend you're above it. Politics is all about influence. Not like this, never like this. There was a pause. Your granddaughter, she wants to be a doctor, right? It would be a shame if her medical school applications, Nancy cut him off, threaten my family again. And I'll make sure the first documents we release are about your personal involvement in Project PRISM. The line went dead. Moments later, every screen in the building went dark. Then, one by one, they lit up with the same message. Think about what you're risking. Nancy looked around at her team, tired, scared, but still standing. Print everything, she ordered. Every document, every memo, every email. Tomorrow, we show the world the truth. No filters, no algorithms, no control. Outside, the protests grew louder. Inside, the old printing press rumbled to life, ready to fight technology with tradition. The war for truth was about to begin. The morning dawned gray and cold over Washington. Nancy Pelosi stood at her office window, watching members of Congress arrive through crowds of protesters. Today was the day everything would change. Mrs. Speaker, Sarah entered quietly. The House chamber is ready. Security has completed their sweep for electronic devices, and the paper copies distributed to every seat. The redacted versions, as you specified. Nancy nodded, touching the USB drive in her pocket. Any word from our tech sector contacts? All the major CEOs are here. Zuckerberg, Cook, Pichai, they're in the gallery. And Sarah lowered her voice. Our friends inside their companies say several employees are ready to speak up. The vote was unprecedented in its speed and margin. The act passed with an overwhelming majority. As Nancy watched the numbers come in, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but not completely. This is just the beginning, she told her staff afterward. They won't give up their power easily. Sarah handed her a secure phone. Your daughter's on the line. She says Christine's social media accounts are all working again. Everything's back to normal. No, Nancy said, taking the phone. Not normal, just different. We've won the first battle, but the war, she touched the USB drive in her pocket. The war is just starting. Outside her office window, the sun was setting over the Capitol dome. In Silicon Valley, in server farms across the world, the algorithms were still running, still collecting, still analyzing. But now, at least, people knew the truth. Her phone buzzed one last time. An unknown number. You've started something you can't finish. Nancy smiled and turned off the phone. They still didn't understand. This wasn't about finishing anything. It was about beginning something new. Something free. As she gathered her things to leave, Nancy thought about all the battles ahead. The tech companies would fight back. They would try to regain control. But the truth was out now. And truth, once released, couldn't be contained by any algorithm. Ready to go home? Mrs. Speaker, Agent Torres asked. Not yet, she said, looking at the stack of documents on her desk. There's more work to do. This is just the beginning. The USB drive sat heavy in her pocket. Its other secrets still waiting to be revealed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights, new revelations. But for tonight, for this moment, they had struck a blow for freedom. Real freedom, human freedom, and that was worth any price they had to pay. Later that evening, Nancy sat in her office, watching the chaos unfold on multiple news channels. The stock market had experienced its biggest drop since 2008, with tech companies bearing the brunt of the fall. Mrs. Speaker, Elena knocked and entered. "You need to see this. It's happening all over the country." She turned up the volume on one of the screens. People were gathering in streets, not in protest this time, but in shock and solidarity, outside tech company headquarters. Employees were walking out, many carrying boxes of documents. "It's like a dam breaking," Elena said softly. "Everyone who knew something, who saw something, they're all coming forward now." Nancy's secure phone rang. "The president." "Nancy." His voice was grave. "The National Security Council is in emergency session. The implications of what you've revealed, the foreign policy implications alone." "I know, Mr. President. That's why we need to act fast, before they can regroup. The tech companies are demanding an emergency meeting, threatening economic consequences." Nancy laughed tiredly. "Of course they are. But they've shown their hand now. Everyone knows what they're capable of." After the call, she walked to the window. The sun had set, but the city was lit up with unusual activity. News vans, crowds gathering, police presence heightened. Sarah rushed in. "Mom, Mark Zuckerberg is here. He's demanding to see you." "No security clearance anymore," Nancy reminded her. "He's just a civilian now, he says. He says he has information about your family that you'd want to hear." Nancy turned, anger flashing in her eyes. "Send him in. I want to hear him try to threaten me one more time." Zuckerberg entered, his usual confidence completely gone. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly. "Nancy, please," he began. "You don't understand what you've done. The systems we built, they're not just about control. They're holding things together, the economy, social order, everything. No, Mark, they're holding people down, controlling them, and it's over. You think this is a victory?" He laughed desperately. "The Chinese systems are worse. The Russian ones too. We were protecting democracy by destroying it from within." Nancy shook her head. "How many lives have your algorithms ruined? How many suicides? How many broken families? We were making the world better." He shouted, losing composure. "People can't handle the truth. They can't handle reality. We were giving them what they needed to know." Nancy said firmly, "You were playing God, and you're not qualified for the job." After he left, more reports flooded in. Tech companies were destroying servers. Employees were downloading files before they could be deleted. The internet itself was behaving strangely. As major platforms struggled to adapt to the new reality, Mrs. Speaker, it was Agent Torres again. "There's something else, something odd." "What is it?" "All those protest crowds from yesterday, they're gone, completely, like they never existed." The chamber was packed when Nancy arrived. The tension was palpable. Hundreds of representatives sitting uncomfortably without their phones, tablets, or laptops, above in the gallery. She could see the tech executives, their usual confidence, replaced by barely concealed anxiety. "Nancy," it was Senator Thompson, catching her arm. "Are you sure about this? The market futures are already dropping just on rumors of your speech. Look around, Bill." She gestured to the gallery. "Look at their faces. They know what's coming." The speaker pro tempore called the session to order. Nancy took her place at the podium, spreading out her papers, actual papers, not digital displays. "My fellow Americans," she began, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "What I'm about to share will shake our nation to its core, but the truth must be told." She glanced up at the gallery. Mark Zuckerberg was typing frantically on his phone. "First, I want to address the events of the past few days. Many of you have seen the stories about me and my colleagues, the accusations, the convenient leaks of altered information." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "Mr. Zuckerberg," she called out, making him jump, "perhaps you'd like to put your phone away and pay attention to what your algorithms can't control." A nervous laugh rippled through the chamber. Zuckerberg pocketed his phone, his face reddening. 3 days ago, I received evidence of what may be the largest conspiracy in human history. A conspiracy not of governments, but of technology companies. A conspiracy to control not just what we see and hear, but what we think and feel. She held up the first document. The screens behind her flickered to life, displaying redacted versions. These records show a program called Project Prism. Its goal: to use artificial intelligence to manipulate human behavior on a mass scale. The chamber erupted in shocked conversations. Nancy waited for them to quiet. You've all experienced it. The ads that seem to read your mind. The social media feeds that know your fears, your dreams, your weaknesses. But it goes so much deeper. She clicked to the next document. These companies haven't just been collecting our data. They've been using it to shape our reality. That's a lie. The shout came from the gallery. It was Sundar Pichai, Google's CEO. Half standing, is it? Nancy's voice was steel. Would anyone from Google like to confirm that? A moment of silence. Then, in the gallery, a woman stood up. She's telling the truth. I worked on Project Prisms, behavioral modification algorithms. Security moved toward her, but more people stood. I can confirm it too, a man called out. Facebook's emotion manipulation protocols, the Apple tracking systems, Twitter's thought suppression algorithms. One by one, tech workers were standing, finally breaking their silence. The tech executives' faces had gone from red to ashen. Nancy held up another document. These records show success rates of over 90% in manipulating user emotions, beliefs, and behaviors. They can make you angry, sad, afraid. They can change your political views, your buying habits, even your relationships. The chamber was in chaos now. Representatives were shouting questions, demands for action. Order. The speaker pro tempore banged his gavel. Order in the chamber. Nancy waited for quiet. Yesterday, you saw their power. The synchronized news stories, the controlled protests, the sudden discoveries of compromising information. They showed us exactly what they can do. She glanced at her phone, a special one, provided by military intelligence, clean of any commercial software. The markets are in freefall, she announced. Trading has been halted on most major tech stocks. Wall Street is finally seeing the truth. You'll destroy the economy, someone shouted. No. Nancy corrected. We'll save our democracy and our souls. She pulled out the final document, the one she'd been most afraid to share. This last file shows their plans for the future, neural interfaces, direct brain-computer connections. They want to move from influencing our thoughts to controlling them directly. The chamber fell silent. Even the tech executives had stopped protesting. I moved to immediately pass the Technology Freedom and Democracy Protection Act, Nancy declared. Not the watered-down version they tried to force on us, but the full measure. With all its restrictions and oversights. You can't do this, Zuckerberg called out, his voice shaking. The technological damage, Mr. Zuckerberg. Nancy cut him off. Your systems are already identifying and flagging potential dissidents. Your algorithms are already suppressing unwanted thoughts. If that's not technological damage, what is? More tech workers were standing now, nodding, confirming her words. Years of guilt and silence, finally breaking. Nancy nodded. Because they never did. Not really. Just digital manipulation and a few paid actors. Without the algorithms pushing people, without the coordinated messaging, they lost control. Torres finished. As midnight approached, Nancy finally prepared to leave. The USB drive felt lighter now, its terrible secrets exposed to the light. But something kept nagging at her. Sarah, she called out, get me the technical team. There's something in these files we haven't found yet. Something bigger. Now, it's almost midnight. Now, Nancy confirmed. Because somewhere in Silicon Valley, they're already planning their next move. And we need to be ready. She looked at her phone one last time before turning it off. The last message still glowed on the screen. You've started something you can't finish. No. She whispered to herself. I've finished something you should never have started. But in her heart, she knew this wasn't the end. The tech giants had tasted true power. The power to shape reality itself. They wouldn't give that up easily. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new battles. But for tonight, she had struck a blow for freedom, real freedom. And that was worth any price they might have to pay. Asterisk all those protest crowds from yesterday. They're gone, completely, like they never existed.